Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Martina, I just want to confirm that we're recording and live and everything is great on your end.
It is, yes, Madam Mayor.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So consider this your reminder, folks, that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Township's YouTube channel. Of course, we are doing this meeting exclusively by Zoom, just like old times, due to the concerns of the weather. And thank you all for this. So per our online meeting norm, council, please raise your hands if you remember or are able to raise your reaction hand so that you can speak, but I'll also try and keep an eye out for you with all the Zoom windows popping around. So just a quick little system check and calling the roll. We have Deputy Mayor Nelson. Hello. We have Councillor Watt.
Present.
Hello. Councillor Vervoort. There you are. And Councillor Johnston. Hello. And folks, as a rule, don't forget to take yourself off mute because it's been a while since we've had to do these. On the staff side of things, joining us tonight, we have our CAO, Alana Arthurs. We have our acting clerk, Martina Chait-Hartwig. Interim treasurer, Paul Kramer. I don't see Paul on screen.
Madam Mayor, he's just working on getting his audio together.
Perfect, thank you. Manager of Public Works, Jake Condon. Hello, Jake. Our fire chief, Jeff Pedersen. And planner, Christina Coulter. Hello. So with the quorum of council in attendance, I do call the meeting to order. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Nichi-Sagig and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations, and we honor those teachings. And if I could please ask for a moment of silence. Okay, so looking at the agenda, which has been posted and distributed, do we have any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing nothing, could I please ask for a motion to adopt our agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Report. Thank you. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Nelson. And all in favor? That carries. Moving on to our consent agenda, we did have item 7.1. Item 7.1 was what do we have here? An application, complete application, but that's being now rescheduled to February 7th. So nothing further on that. And before I move on to delegations and presentations, I see Paul has now joined us, our treasurer. I should have also noted that we have also on the line Maggie Pearson, our CEO librarian, and Don Hellman, our temporary CBO, is also with us this evening. I'm sure we'll see their faces as the evening progresses. So moving into our public meeting. So this is the second meeting of our budget process. And for that, we're going to be calling it as a public meeting, so members from the public can comment. So first, folks, if council, I could get a motion to open the public meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Councillor Watt, seconded by Councillor Johnston, all in favor. And that too carries at 5:05 p.m. So I will now turn it over to our treasurer, Paul Kramer, to go forward with your portion of the presentation, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just want to make sure, do a quick sound check, make sure everyone can hear me well. Okay,
We
good.
can, yep.
Of course, I'm in meetings all day, and then the most important one, I go to join and I can't join and have to, my computer freezes forever to restart. So I'm kind of flustered at the moment, but I'll regroup here. So if we can get the presentation up on the screen. Thank you very much. So for any members of the public who are watching this live or on the live screen or on the recording on our YouTube channel, welcome. And tonight I'm going to be going over the 2023 budget as it stands today. It's important to note that it's constantly a work in progress until final passage, but we have made some progress since the meeting in December, which I will be going over both in this presentation a little bit and then with council later on. So we can move on to the next slide. So what's my goals and my agendas and my agenda for tonight's meeting? So, I think just to give a high level budget summary, what's impacting the budget, and from there we're going to go into where we are in the budget process and what's left to come. Typically, point number 3 is where everyone is going to jump, and kind of the most important, what does this all mean to the residents at the end of the day. I'll give an overview of what our key operating changes are in this budget. And then same thing for capital. What are the projects involved and some overview of the funding. I'll then present a little bit of information on the Joint Public Works and Fire Hall building and the historical tax increases and comparisons to some of the other neighboring municipalities in the county. We move on to the next slide. Okay, so budget process. I have bolded where we are at. So this process kicks off much earlier than this from a staff perspective. We start our internal discussions kind of August, September. I know managers are always kind of thinking about their budget and what's coming up and, thinking about costs. So, but from the official process perspective, we presented December 6th, and I'm calling it budget meeting number 1. Now, it was a little bit of a unique situation in that I was presenting a budget to the council who had never had a formal council meeting as a group. So it was a little bit difficult to understand and know from a staff's perspective what council's priorities are heading into not only this year, but their 4-year term. So there were certain assumptions that I could make in previous years or in other years where I understand those priorities that I wasn't comfortable making heading into this process. So it was presented as a working budget and a working draft. Since then, I have been able to do some more work along with staff. Council has had the opportunity to ask some questions. So that brings us to where we are today. So there is a report on the council agenda for the meeting that follows this that does have some additional information on the changes that have been that are being recommended for the second draft. So where we go from here, if there is any feedback from the public, whether at this meeting or subsequent to this meeting, I will bring that feedback to council to be considered at the February 7th budget meeting. Again, any further changes, whether staff initiated or council initiated, will be included in that budget. And then hopefully, if all goes to plan and we get consensus and we can have a budget adoption on February 21st. At that time also, I would be bringing back a complete updated budget package for that 21st meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, so to me, this is the big picture story of our budget that's being presented. And so, the number one factor that we experienced as a municipality, being a purchaser of things, a buyer of things, just like everyone else in the country, is we're experiencing the impacts of inflation. So not only inflation, but interest rates. So if we look at CPI, and this number could be updated at this point. I could have checked that, I guess, but when I presented in December, it was at 6.9%. The other thing to remember from inflation is that a good portion of our costs are not the same as the costs considered when calculating CPI. We have quite a bit of construction costs, and the non-residential construction price index rose 25.9% in the Toronto area over the past year. And we move into part two, is that we have some significant capital needs and purchases required in 2023, along with aging infrastructure. I don't think we're unique in these challenges. I think these are challenges that are faced from quite a few municipalities, especially small townships like ourselves. But we, to highlight the impact of some of these inflation, some of this inflation, is we look at the Joint Fire Hall project, which was approved in the 2022 budget, pending final design and cost and tendering and all that. We still needed to get the numbers to come in at a number that would work within the budget, but we were looking at $475,000 annual debenture payment for that project. That was assuming $7 million capital cost and 2.25%, I think, interest was the assumption at the time. So now with 4.25% interest and those costs rising closer to 12 million, our debenture payment has gone up nearly 100% on that project, closer to 915,000. So that's the type of challenges that we're going to be facing as a township, not only this year, going forward. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so what is this? Where are we at? How is this going to impact the residents? So the numbers I'd like to highlight here are when we were in our working draft, and there were some assumptions still to be made, some work to be done. We presented the impact of the tax rate at 13.25% or 0.27%. Some of the changes that are being recommended as part of the second draft did bring down the budget 4.64%. And so currently, as the budget sits, it is a 8.64% impact to the average tax bill. And then so if we look at impact per $100,000 of assessment, that's $36 annually, or $3 a month, $3.03. For the median property in our township, that would be of $256,000 assessment. That would be $93.22, or annually, or $7.77 monthly. We can move on to the next slide. I'm going to go over high level what's impacting those numbers. How are we getting to those changes? So number one is a salary and wage cost of living adjustment. Previously agreed upon from council was the compensation agreement, which for the cost of living adjustment for staff ties it to the OMERS pension inflation index. Just given, CPI is 6.9%, the annual adjustment was 6%, which is OMERS does cap the increase annually. And then we look at insurance. There's insurance costs are increasing for all municipalities. This is becoming an area that is getting more and more expensive for municipalities each year. The risk continues to rise across the board, and some of the lawsuits and payouts within the municipal sector are growing all the time. So we did see a cost increase of $60,000, which represents essentially 1% to the levy. For our fuel, I think everyone can see it at the pumps, but fuel is increasing, for us as well, and can be a key input or a key cost in our public works department. Diesel has increased 73.6% or cents per liter, or 51% from November 2021 to 2022. So this is an estimate, but it's about $15,000 impact, or 0.25%. So then we get into some of the adjustments that we make when we do our departmental reviews and discussions. The current contract and service provider for our paging services for our fire department we'll need to find a new provider. And just given the infrastructure and the new costs that we're estimating, that's an impact of approximately $34,800. Various kind of material costs that have increased within the public works department. So those costs are related to calcium, which is for dust control on gravel roads. Also for sand and salt, which are used throughout the winter months on roads. The cost increases related to those materials is about another %, or $63,000. Our police contract has gone down approximately $20,000, just over. And then as we're going through and having all of our departmental discussions, we do minor adjustments that increase here and there, kind of across the board, and those amount to $72,197. We can move on to the next slide. Now, these are the impacts related to staffing. The first impact is that we are now required as an OMERS employer to provide OMERS, or the option to part-time staff, to all part-time staff, to enroll in the OMERS program. We don't fully know who will and who will not participate, so it's an estimate at this point in time, but it's estimated to be $26,000. Approved by council in 2022 was the move away from our current IT provider and to hire an IT analyst, which would be shared with a neighboring municipality. And the extra cost to do that would be about, or a little over $28,000. Now, I think it's important to kind of just highlight some of these changes, or at least for this change, especially that this would it would result in a significantly higher level of service in terms of IT within the township. And as the township needs to grow and kind of provide more modern services, I think this was identified to be pretty critical in order to enable those modernization of our services and get the resulting efficiencies. So we are proposing an additional summer labor. The summer labor is required in order to complete grass cutting that was previously contracted out. This is just the wage portion. There in the capital section, there is a cost of a new mower, and there may be some costs related to fuel, which are captured in the probably in that I could say in that other category on the previous page. And then it was approved in 2022, moving a part-time to full-time operator. The cost of that change is just under $6,000. During 2022, the township completed and approved a compensation review. This ensured that the township wages continued to be at market levels. And the result of that was just over $33,000. And then we do anticipate some employee gappings and vacancies throughout the year, some that we already are anticipating, and then so that amounts to $92,000. And so all of that summarized for operating is an increase of $374,000 or 6.25% to the levy. And I think given the cost of inflation, given it is over 6.6% itself, it is somewhat in line. It does reflect some of the challenges there. So if we move on to the next slide. So what are the options, and what are the kind of the challenges associated with those options? So I think these options are more if council and were to determine that this is a levy that needs to be decreased further. So I think one option would be to use some reserves and reserve funds to fund various capital projects. Now, the challenge with that is that, as alluded to earlier, there's some critical capital projects that are going to be required, and so which will require substantial reserves themselves. And so I don't think there's anything in this budget that is kind of one-off in a sense. And so to use additional reserve funds for regular replacement of capital is not typically a sustainable approach. The second option would be to maybe delay some capital projects, but we're working through our asset management plan currently, and the early findings of that plan are that we are behind on our asset replacement needs, and so any projects that are pushed out only kind of delay the inevitable replacement and compound what is typically referred to as the infrastructure deficit. Now, I would say, in this sense, definitely more information, more work needs to be done and understood on the longer term capital needs of the township. And then so the kind of last option is to increase taxes on the basis that inflation is putting pressures on the township, but also we always look at what that increase is, but there has to be kind of an assessment on whether the current level of funding is sufficient and sustainable going forward. And I think that can be done sometimes by comparing to surrounding municipalities, but also to what our desired level of services as a community and as a council. But the challenge with increasing taxes in the middle of high inflation is that everyone is experiencing cost increases, and additional property taxes can only add to that burden. That last point it did happen. We did review and we did make some changes. So we can move on to the next slide. This is a high-level capital funding summary. I should note what this doesn't capture is one of the recommendations as part of the second draft is to use some development charges that are in reserves to fund some of our roads projects. So the levy does change slightly once we get to the second draft, but those tables this whole package would be updated for the final budget. What you can see though is the approximate capital budget is about 4 million, with 1.85 being funded through the levy. Move to the next slide. So I have a list of our capital projects. I'm not going to go into detail on every project. I think if the public or council or anyone wants to hear that information, each department head went into detail on their department and each project at the December 6th meeting. So that would be on our YouTube channel, but I will highlight kind of the key critical projects here. And I think what you'll see here is a lot of the projects under general government. We are required to update our development charge study every 5 years. That is currently being funded through development charges. Some continued work on our pay equity, ensuring that our pay is equitable across the board. Council is intending to undertake a strategic plan to set out the priorities and objectives for their term of council. One of the recommendations for the second draft, and again not reflected here, is to decrease to this amount actually. So this is correct. The 40,000 would be funded within the 2023 budget for an update to the zoning bylaw budget. A truck purchase for the bylaw enforcement. This truck is required due to increasing staff. The purchase that reflects the annual amount that was to be put into reserves, but the cost is actually incorrect in this table. It will be updated at the next draft. I believe it is 45,000. What's important to note about that truck purchase is it does come out of the building reserve and it is not paid for through the levy. For fire, there's a variety of projects that are needed, just kind of our general and standard replacements in terms of gear and some equipment for the trucks and helmets. We are required to do a master fire plan and community risk assessment. And so that is included in the budget for 2023. As alluded to earlier, the paging infrastructure needs to be updated. And so there's a cost of 25,000. For Station 1, it's proposed to do a review of the needs and what can be done for potential future updates to the facility. And Station 2, parking lot resurfacing, cost of 30,000. Move on to the next slide. For the Douro rink, and further down you'll see the Warsaw rink. There is a garage door replacement required at Douro, and at Warsaw rink A compressor replacement will be required in 2024. So it's being proposed to start putting some money away for that project in the amount of 20,000. And also at the Warsaw Rig, there is a water softener replacement required. Continuing with Parks and Recreation, there are 3 projects being proposed. One is to replace the back dam shelter roof. This is for the structure at the back dam park, and to also build a new shelter at Clintonia Park. When we look at the library, these projects have been presented and to the library board, but the projects that are included are some facility improvements and replacements related to the awning at the entrance, some drywall repair and painting, new flooring, and a water filtration system. The other project included there is the annual books and materials update, which is included each year in the amount of 14,000. When we look at the transportation services, again, part of the second draft is recommending to delay the purchase of the brushing unit. So that would be moved to 2024. But the biggest purchases in this capital budget would be the excavator with a brush head in the amount of 500,000, and then the previously agreed to gravel pit purchase in the amount of 1.6 million. The actual cost is that includes kind of all closing costs, etc. And an additional snowblower or replacement of a snowblower is required for 16,000. Move on to the next slide. And so here we are with all the roads projects. And I think what this shows is the breadth of the work that's going to be completed across the township. And the related costs to do that work. If I'm just going, yeah. So the big projects are always going to be related to surface treatment. However, there are some larger gravel roads projects, Douro-Dummer Road from 4th line to County Road 40 in the amount of 96,000. And then for surface treatment, our larger projects are 4th line road, South Dummer, from Douro-Dummer to Clifford Road in 120,000. Douro-Dummer Road for 125,000. And then there is a couple projects here that would be cost shared with Autonomy South Monaghan, and that division, or 2 projects on Division Road. And the last 2 projects are Douro 7th line road from County Road 4 to Bradfield Road, and then Sawmill Road from 3rd line Dummer to 4th line Dummer. I should mention, I've brushed over some of these projects, and some of them are large expenditures, and I'm not going to do them justice as the treasurer, kind of getting into all the details of these. The managers did go into detail, but they are also all available on this call for any questions or answers, except for, I believe, our parks manager was unavailable to attend the meeting. But if there are any questions during this meeting, people are available to provide some answers and clarity. And I think that is my last slide. No, it's not. Okay, so mentioned this project earlier, and I think this is a project that's been discussed for quite some time now, but really what we're seeing is the the previous plan that was presented to council last year had annual debt payments of $475,000. In order to increase our levy to get to the point of able to pay that amount, what we were going to do is use approximately $1 million of our reserves, which are there to be used, and offset each year the amount of levy that we're able to raise by the reserve amount. So for example, in 2023, we would have a levy amount for this project of $135,000, which would mean we would need $339,000 from reserves in order to make the debt payment of $475,000. This plan seemed reasonable and doable, but given the interest increases and cost pressures and of construction, we can go to the next slide. And you see that we're now at a debt payment of just under $915,000. And so, the amount of reserves has not changed. We still have about $1 million available of reserves for this project. And so what that does is there's, I did this more for illustrative purposes. I wouldn't think option one would be, a recommended option, but it's there for illustrative purposes that if we follow the previous plan of 1.18%, we would in 2025 have a 6.86% increase to the levy related just to funding this debenture payment, followed by 4.92 in 2026. So what can we do, to kind of avoid that larger increase in 2025 alone? So we can kind of increase the levy for 2024. What I didn't show, but could entirely be an option, would be to increase the levy in 2023 if we wanted to smooth it even further. But this is, I think the options are somewhat limitless, but just trying to give a few examples here. So to kind of smooth out the increase from 2024 to 2026, we'd be looking at a 3.78% in 2024 and 2025, with 3.34 remaining to get to our annual debt payment of $914,000. This is kind of where we're at. So this is the information available at this time, and kind of some future discussions are going to need to be had on the direction of this project. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think it can be helpful to understand, what the increases have been in previous years, and also, how do we compare to other municipalities? So, I think we can. So what this slide shows is that since 2016. The average increase over this time was, for the township, was 3.4% for the township share. So the solid line is the township taxes, and then the dotted line is what your total property tax bill changed each year. So it was the average since 2016 for the township was 3.4%. and 2.4% on average when you include the county and education taxes over that same period. So for reference, CPI over the same time frame increased on average 3%. So we move to the next slide. And then how do we compare kind of to our neighbors? And anytime we do any sort of comparison to any other township or municipality for property taxes, it can be a little bit difficult just because you're comparing sometimes very different things, very different levels of service, very different demographics, tax break down, some townships have pretty healthy non-residential taxes, which help offset the impact to the residential sector. And just the makeup of our township is that we're almost entirely residential, and we don't have the benefit of that. However, when we do look at what the median assessment is, and so therefore what the median total tax bill is in 2022, or we can look at the lower tier first. So our median tax bill in 2022 was $983. And so there is a pretty big range there when we look at the surrounding municipalities, but the last column in the table there does show that OSM, their median property pays $1,721, Norwood is $1,506, Selwyn $1,266, Havelock $1,142, and North Kawartha $676. I'm also showing what the average annual change since 2016 was. So our average annual change to our median property was 3.38 for the lower tier. And that, there's kind of a wide range there. Anything from it's gone down in Selwyn, and there can be a variety of reasons for that. But sometimes that can be just high growth, high increases to certain properties in terms of assessment. So there can be some weird things going on there, but they've had they've averaged a decrease, and then OSM is at 3.87. So we're kind of, all in the somewhat same ballpark, but our average was 3.38. And now I believe, yeah, there we go. So if there is anyone from the public here with any questions or comments, I would like to open the floor.
And before we solicit those comments from folks, just a quick thank you, Paul, for your detailed overview of where things are at, and thank you to staff for all the work. As you said, they start in August, September, and it's a long journey to get to this point, and whittling it down and trying to find the best possible path forward for all of the different needs of the township. So thank you to you and the staff for all your work so far on this. So looking, as Paul had mentioned, the floor is now open to receive comments from the public. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes. I might be a little flexible on that, depending on how on time and on track we're going, but we are trying to be respectful of everybody's time. And Martina will call on your name if you want to raise your hand to join the queue. That would be raising your virtual hand, folks. Is there anyone from the public who wants to make a delegation? I believe I know there was one group that was looking to. It looks like we have Jim Bailey, who is ready to and able to present. Martina, are you seeing anybody else in the queue right now by chance?
At the moment, I just see Jim.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sir, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Worship and Council, for, and I have provided a presentation. This is through the ad hoc Arena Facilities Committee. I believe this is the floor that we're referring to, Your Worship. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. All right, Mart, thank you. So 2 minutes. Those that know me know how difficult this is. Okay, so if you can go on to the next slide. All right, so the committee, I just wanted to go over and you guys can, I'll leave this with you. Essentially, we have a variety of community members that volunteered their time for this venture, as well as our mayor and several supportive staff. And I'd like to thank everybody. Liam, Ryan, Carrie, Rial, Gerard Sullivan, and myself have been meeting since about September to on this topic of looking at our facilities for improvement initiatives. Next slide, please. So again, really the background is, and those that are, sort of whether they be active in sports and recreation and other programs, both in our community and others, recognize that our facilities are aging, and services for our youth are not really keeping up to the needs, nor the facilities offered by other municipalities. If we hope to, keep the families that we have in our township, as well as attract other families to come to our municipality, I think we really need to seriously review what we have and determine what is required. As we all know, an active community leads to a healthy community, and we really need to take a look at that and see what we can do to make our community more active. Next slide, please. So really the objective, and I'm not sure, I know there's a lot of new faces, and congratulations to all those that are on council as well. It's great to see a few familiar faces in the crowd here. Douro Minor Hockey produced a letter, I believe it was sometime in the summer of 22, really just sort of highlighting our concerns and our needs and some ideation, and that's where the ad hoc committee originated from, and it's sort of started from there. But what the objective is with community outreach and direction, we want to determine the needs of our community, review the feasibility of those requests, and where appropriate, complete the feasibility studies and assessment required for external funding opportunities, such as grants and other upper tier programs. So essentially, what is it the community needs, and what could we achieve with the facilities or the space that we have available to us, and then looking towards the funding opportunities that exist. We must be ready to appropriately respond to these funding programs. We have to have essentially shovel ready in many cases, and I think that's one of the limiting factors in the past. We haven't really invested in these studies in order to be ready for those funding programs as they arrive. Next slide, please. The path forward, and this is all obviously, as we go through each of these steps, this is, we really hope that we have some significant council involvement and staff involvement through these, obviously. But what we're hoping to do in each step here is review our existing arena facilities, conduct a community engagement to understand the needs and the wants of the community, as well as tolerance to increases in taxes and how those upgrades. I mean, we just talked about, if we want to spend money, that translates to an increase in taxes. And we have to understand the tolerance that we can't have the world without paying for it. So not only do what we want, but also as a community, what are we willing to pay for as citizens within that community? From the engagement, create a list of most desirable uses, potential partners, and other user groups. So really just kind of narrowing down what it is that we could have within these facilities, what does the community need, and then opening that up to staff, township staff, to do an initial screening and feasibility, just within the skill sets which we have available to us, do what we can internally, as well as those members on the ad hoc committee, and then perhaps we need to conduct feasibility studies and perhaps other assessment through other general expertises, structural engineers, etc., that type of thing. And then obviously, once some viable options are identified, move forward with costing and shovel-ready planning. Okay, next slide, please. So the ask. We require resources to complete these objectives, and we must determine what the community requires, what's feasible. But we also need to understand what the funding mechanisms require and strive to accomplish those studies and assessment. I kind of put in here, to fall short or get halfway there with our feasibility program. It's not really getting our community any further. We really need to have, what the funding programs are required is really the objective of this next year of this group community. So essentially the community engagement, there might be some costs involved with that. I've talked to Scott from former mayor from Millbrook. They did a lot of bus trips and sort of took people to different structures and different things to see how much it costs, see what's required, maintenance, that type of thing, as well as the feasibility studies. And based on other communities, Mike's done a great job of reaching out to a number of communities that have done similar exercises, and their budgets range from about $25,000 to $30,000, or sorry, $20,000 to $30,000 up to $50,000. So we just wanted to have up there up to. I should have highlighted the up to, but our request is for an upset limit. And I think part of the ease of this too is, Douro Minor Hockey through Craft Hockeyville has already contributed 25 towards the township for arena facilities. So we're hoping that sort of helps with this process as well. But this is what the group is asking. Next slide, please. I'm probably well over 2 minutes. I do apologize. And lastly, just any questions, and in closing, we certainly thank Mayor and Council for their consideration to making significant and needed improvements to our community's ability to stay active and retain the wonderful families that call Douro-Dummer home. Okay, it's very important.
Thank you, Jim, for that rapid fire 2 minutes.
Can I breathe now?
You can breathe. You can breathe. Take a sip of water. Gather yourself for a moment. Before we ask for any other members of the public to come forward with questions or with comments on other matters of the budget, are there any questions of Mr. Bailey on his presentation on behalf of the committee from council? I'm not seeing any hands up. Councillor Watt.
Well, more just a comment. We know that these facilities are getting old. I think both of them were in the 1980s, so they are definitely hurting. We know there's a need for it, and I just want to say that as a council member myself, and I'll speak for myself, that I certainly do appreciate the effort and support that you're putting into trying to make our community better. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from council? Deputy Mayor Nelson.
Yes. Hi, Jim. Thanks for your presentation, Jim. Jim, I remember not very long ago, I don't remember how long ago, but I think there was an assessment on a lot of our community centers and parks and recreation and mostly the community centers. And I apologize, I don't really know where that went or what really happened with that study, but I'm assuming that study was done before. I think it was. I think that the council of the day actually hired consultants to do that study. I just don't know where that is. Maybe somebody else might know something about that.
Deputy Mayor, I can say that it was, I believe what you're referring to is the master plan, the arenas, parks and recreation master plan. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it probably was, Heather. I'm not exactly sure. I just know there was a study that was involved, I think maybe 3-4 years ago. I'm not really sure how far back it was, but.
Sure. I know I can speak as I've been sitting on the committee with Jim and the rest of the volunteers there, that that master plan was circulated to the committee. It was offered as a background piece of information. There's been a committee formed last term of council to work on that, but it hasn't, it really kind of stalled because of the pandemic, quite frankly. Committee stopped meeting on that. Some of the questions in that report, there was a survey that was also done as part of that. They fed into some of the questions that this committee is looking to address. But the feasibility study, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, the feasibility study that the committee has been talking about isn't necessarily a master plan of sorts. It's more so building on the engagement, the master plan that's been done previously, the engagement that the committee wants to do using their volunteer efforts. And then from there, there may be a requirement to do engineering studies, whether it be around stormwater management or structural or building capabilities or whatever the case may be. And that's the feasibility study piece that I believe the committee is looking for. Is that correct, Mr. Bailey?
Yes, it is correct. I think there was some really good work done during that master plan, as far as, some recognizing some of that needs assessment and kind of where the community had some interest in doing some work. But I think to your point, your worship, I think it kind of stalled out at a certain point. So we're just trying to pick that up again and then really just sort of focus on the main arena facilities. I mean, we've made some upgrades to the fields and other things like that, which is wonderful. This is more dedicated to the arenas, as they are a key infrastructure for the municipality, and it's starting to age and it's starting to fall behind. And we also, there's some ideation there too, where there may be some ability, from a revenue standpoint, depending on how we play this out with, being able to host more or generate more revenue at these arenas. And I'm just spitballing here, but say if you twin padded Douro, you maybe have more tournaments. And if you had even, other space in there and other, a consolidation of maybe even library and other community services, we may be able to do more with less expenditure from an operations and maintenance standpoint. One Zamboni for 2 ice surfaces, one ice crew for 2 ice surfaces, and just making it so it's more cost effective as well. So getting a little bit more minutia into the arenas than what that master plan did, which was more of an overall rec plan, if I understand correctly.
Okay, thanks for your answers. Thanks.
Any other questions from council of Mr. Bailey on behalf of the committee? Seeing nothing further, thank you, sir. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, do we have any other members of the public who are looking to speak to council this evening regarding the budget?
Madam Mayor, we do have 2 other participants, but they haven't actually raised their hands to speak yet. So we can give them a moment.
Folks, if this is your intention, if you don't know how to use the mechanical hand, just take your camera off or take your mic off and yell at us politely. Seeing nothing else from the public. Paul?
Through your worship, if I may, if people are just shy or didn't attend this meeting and would rather submit their questions through email, they are welcome to send them to myself or through Martina. I believe on the advertisement we had Martina's email address, and you can definitely find our contact info on the website. But my email, if you're listening and want it directly, is paulc@douro-dummer.on.ca.
Great, thank you very much for that. So seeing no other hands or comments coming in, Councillor Watt, are you making a motion to close the public meeting, sir?
Oh, I apologize, and I don't know whether it's my tablet here or what, but your voice, everybody else seems clear. Your voice seems to be kind of fuzzy, so I'm having a really hard time hearing what you're saying. You're like, for some things, some are coming through not bad. But anyway, it just could be mine. But I do have some comments on this, if I may, through you, Madam Mayor. Question that Paul just answered, number one. So if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, the first one, and Paul, maybe you can clear up a little bit more on the option one and the option two for the building. Let's say 2026, the levy 989,537. So that's how much out of the levy we have to put in that year to bring us up to an equal payment every year. Is that what that means?
Actually, Councillor Watt, if I may just get you to pause your question momentarily. What we'll do is close the public meeting, and then we'll leave it for questions of council to staff.
Oh, okay. All right, that works.
So seeing no further questions, or pardon me, no other speakers of the public, can I get a motion to close the public meeting, please? Councillor Revort, seconded by Councillor Johnston. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. And now, Councillor Watt, your question, and Mr. Kramer, feel free to go ahead and answer that, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you. And I do have a couple more after that.
Through your worship, Martina, may you please put the presentation back up if it's.
It will just
Sure.
take me 1 moment to
Sure.
bring that back to
I'm just thinking it can be easier to illustrate through the table. So
And if we
What
keep it up for my next questions, please.
sure. I will try to answer without it, and then we'll see if we need to bring it up. So the 915,000, I believe, is the figure, is the amount of the annual debenture payment. So however you slice it, that's the amount we need to pay. That can either come from a reserve each year, or it could come from a levy. So
Okay.
what I'm showing is that using $1 million of reserves for this project and using that amount to pay the debenture payment, the difference each year that we contribute from reserves would need to be paid for from the levy, with the ultimate goal to be, it would need to be 100% funded from the levy, because we're going to run out of reserves at one point, given that we are committing $1 million. So in option one, in 2023, there's 138,000, and that's because we had a 1.18% in the budget last year. I have it in the budget again this year, contribution from the levy, and so it's bumping up the levy each year by that amount. So that means in option one, in order to continue at that path, I was demonstrating that the original plan was in 2024 to also have a 1.18% increase in the levy related to this project in order to fund this project. And if we follow that path, we would have 209,000 from the levy able to contribute to this project. That means the remainder for that year's debenture payment would be 705,000. So that would use 705 of the $1 million. In 2025, we would have, it's kind of a calculus game here. So then we would have 295,000 remaining of our $1 million of reserves for this project. But what that means is we need to get to the full 915,000 debenture payment. In order to do that, we would need 619,000 from the levy, which would result in a 6.86% increase to the levy. Now, what I should say is that's based on the current levy. And so the ultimate increase in that year may be lower because, you know, there's kind of increases each year, but I'm looking at it from today's perspective. So therefore, the increase in 2025, in order to make that debenture payment, would need to be 6.86%. And then in order to get from 619 to 914, it would require another 4.92% increase to the levy. So we would have that levy commitment for 20 years. And then, you know, once that debenture is paid off, that would free up that amount for whatever else at that time.
Okay, all right, thank you. That kind of makes it halfway clear. I'm still not, I just look at like 700 and some $1,000 is, or like 790,000 is 13% based on $60,000.
Right, but we already have the previous year's amount. So I could do another table that shows the annual increase in the levy required.
Okay.
But we already have the previous amount from the levy, you know, committed each year for that project and for the debenture.
Great, thank you. My next questions are for Jake, if that's all right with you, Madam Mayor. Jake, surface treatment for Caves Road looks awfully low. Like, I mean, that's a fairly long stretch, or are we only doing just a piece of it?
Yeah, thank you, through you, Mayor. The project for Caves Road is just I've kind of split that into two. We'll do the ditching and brushing this year, or in 2023, and it's scheduled for surface treatment in 2024.
Okay, thanks, because it was under the surface treatment in the presentation there, when it was only like 16,000 or something, and I thought, well, that looks pretty low for, you know, compared to the other projects, but that's fine. So, and my next question is with the brush head. There's a brush head and there's a machine with a brush head. Is the single brush head the new one that was going on a grader that we discussed before, that we talked about, or is that are they part and part of the same?
Yeah, that's correct. The brushing unit is a new piece of equipment, and the excavator with the brush head is a replacement for the current one that we have.
And that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure, because I knew we had talked one time about the one that attaches to the grader or something or other, and it seemed to be a pretty viable thing if it was something down the road we could use. So thank you, I appreciate it. That's good for my questions, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from council? I saw Councillor Vervoort, you had your hand up earlier. The floor is yours, sir. Oh, you're muted. Has to happen once.
Thank you kindly. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for Paul Creamer. I'm curious to know as to the interest rate that we're currently earning on any amount sitting in our reserves, and has that interest income been included in the calculations on our debenture payments?
Has it been included on the amount? You know, it varies, because this time last year, I think we were quite a few of our investments were getting under 1%. You know, I think it obviously has bounced back this year, and we're getting pretty good returns on any new investments. So we ladder our investments. So we have some coming due in 3 years, some coming due in 2, some coming in 1. We try to spread, and so we take advantage of these higher interest rate periods and try to minimize the impacts of the lower interest rate periods. The interest does get allocated kind of back into the reserves, but you know, I don't know if it's material enough. You know, I could add the 50,000, but when you're looking at you know, what is it after the, I'd have to bring it up, but the total cost of the debenture over the 20 years, when we're using the reserves over the first 2 years, 3 years at most, you know, I could factor it in, but really even the $1 million is a bit of an estimate. You know, I think once we finalize the funding, there might be some numbers here and there that we might be able to contribute a little bit more, a little bit less. But I think I'm confident in the $1 million. There might be a little bit more able to be committed. So yeah, we could get that accurate, but you know, at the end of the day, it won't probably be material.
Thank you.
Any other? Sorry, go ahead, Councillor.
Madam Mayor, that was my only question, and I know you had asked this before, but I would make a motion to close this session.
Oh, did we not? We had a motion. Oh no, we already had that motion. It's good.
Okay, sorry.
Right, Madam Clerk? Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions from council of staff on the budget at all? Concerns, questions, areas that we want to look into further as council? It's a quiet bunch tonight. Councillor Watt?
Yeah, sorry. And just to elaborate on what Paul said, you know, with the general public being able to, you know, they didn't have to necessarily be at this public meeting. They can put in emails or suggestions or ask questions later, stuff like that. That's the same as council. It'd be nice for all of councillor to, you know, submit in some points, some questions, some queries, some whatever. I mean, you know, so it gives staff that little bit more. These meetings run pretty short, and you know, something pops up in your mind 20 minutes from now, jot it down, send it in.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Since I have, oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor, did I see your hand up?
Sorry, get me unmuted there. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, Paul and staff, for I know all the hard work that goes into a budget. And anyways, I'd like to I really appreciate the hard work that you have done on and since the last presentation. Anyways, I'd like to thank staff and for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Deputy Mayor. I do have a couple of questions myself of staff in general. There's been some questions back and forth by email. I know that's been shared by council or shared among council over the last couple of days. I'm curious about two particular projects that are on the budget, one being the Clintonia Park shelter and the other being the parking lot resurfacing at Station 2. I know Mike Mood, our recreation manager, is not with us this evening, so I won't go into too much detail about that. Some of the question is whether or not that the funding for that shelter can come from the Donwood Parks reserves, of which I believe there is a portion of those funds. I wonder if we actually even need to go forward with that project now. I would be more inclined, being part of the Clintonia Park committee when that park was redeveloped. I know that there's quite a bit of interest in the community to have more community involvement, do some fundraising, and what have you. And I would like to turn it back to the community to see what it is that they can do, with the hopes of putting, you know, if there's something that needs to be topped up and put in the budget for a subsequent year, but take that out altogether. As far as the parking lot resurfacing for Station 2, that's at the Douro station. I know a lot of work and effort has gone in to do a lot of work with very little funding, you know, maximize the funds to do some upgrades there, and that curb appeal to the parking lot would be helpful, but is it really necessary? And Chief Pedersen, I'm just wondering if you could pop on and comment about that a little bit, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, for your question. So you may remember when council did a tour, we showed the area of the entrance to the renovation of the fire station that we're doing. Some of the areas already been dug up because of the entrance, the reformatting of the building. There's 2 more pieces that have to come out that will be dug up in that area. And there is, the day that we're there, you can kind of visually see the layers that have been put on top. But when it rains or we get melt, whatever the case may be, that whole front of that part of that building, it's quite a few inches of standing water. So this is would be to fix the areas that we have to dig out. Some of it's already done, some of it needs to be completed still. And then to try to address the sloping concern to get that water away. It's a very large parking lot when we look at the public works side, the fire side, the library side, the access to the Parks and Rec. So this isn't going to do the whole parking lot, which I know is getting on in age as well. But this would be kind of the bigger chunk that is naturally sloped lower than the addition that was put on some time ago that Public Works is there, but everything pools down into where that fuel station was and the entrance of the building. So right now we do have some gravel. You know, it's just not ideal to be working with the gravel as far as maintenance and when we're doing hose testing and in and out of the vehicles. And it doesn't match the rest of it. So that's what the recommendation was to try to put it back and deal with our drainage issues.
So it's not just curb appeal to kind of tie it all up again, but it's more so for function as it relates to using the fire hoses and drainage, you're saying? Yeah,
that's correct. Sorry, it's definitely not just to make it fresh and pretty black to match the rest of the building. It's the entrance of that area now that we have the firefighters entering. That's probably the worst area for the flooding. So they have to walk through quite a bit of water on certain days to get into the building. So we're just trying to raise, and if you go there, you can see it's probably a little hard now with the snow and the weather, but if you time it right, you can see that there has been layers put over there over the years, but needs some work underneath the surface to get the levels sloping in the right way.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, could I please get a motion to receive this draft draft 2023 capital and operating budget report? Deputy Mayor Nelson. Seconded. Councillor Vervoort, all in favor? And that carries. So as Councillor Watt said, Council certainly get questions and concerns to staff, and of course for Council and the public, our next budget meeting will be on February 7th. So keep that in mind to be able to tune in and watch. So if we can please move on to item number 9.1, our report on the capital project status. Are there any items on that report that Council would like to discuss? Seeing no hands up, could I get a motion to receive that report, please? Councillor Vervoort, seconded. Councillor Watt, all in favor? And that motion carries. Item 9.2, the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee, our CAO, Alana Arthurs. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. So as you're aware, we did establish this committee. We had one member, unfortunately, that had ceased to own property in the township, and based on our terms of reference, it was a requirement. In the meantime, we did have someone else reach out inquiring about the ability to participate. I did inform them at that time we had a full committee. And after receiving the resignation from the one member, we did reach out again to determine if they were still interested. They said they were. So we would ask that council amend the bylaw and ultimately appoint Jeff Martin in place of Shauna Laurie on that committee. Pending that, we will continue to try to bring everybody together and move forward with a meeting so we can start having conversations about this particular item.
Thank you for that. Any questions of staff on that, Councillor Watt?
No, I was going to make a motion to follow the recommendation. Jeff's a good guy, so I do know him personally, so I think he'll fit in just nicely.
Sounds great. Is that, are you seconding that motion, Councillor Johnson? Yes, you are. I'm reading your lips because you're on mute. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Item 9.3, delegation of authority on consent applications. And this is Christina Coulter, our planner. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Watson and members of council. You have before you Report Planning 2023-06, which is a request that council authorize delegated authority to the planner as it relates to making recommendations to Peterborough County Land Division about whether or not township supports the severance application and any conditions to be imposed, and that the bylaw be approved at the appropriate point in the meeting. Just as a quick recap, the report does outline the prescribed process for severance applications and identifies opportunities for streamlining the township's role as a commenting agency in that process. Council will still be apprised of the severance applications as staff propose to attach each each completed municipal appraisal form to the consent section of the regular council meeting agenda. And for controversial applications or applications that require direction from council, staff are proposing to bring forward those to the next appropriate regular meeting of council for direction. So if council has any questions, I would be pleased to answer them.
Thank you for that. Any questions from council? Do we have a motion from council?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
I'll make the motion to accept the recommendations.
Thank you, Adam. Is there someone to second that? Councillor Johnson, all in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you. Item 9.4, municipal election accessibility report from the clerk's office. And that is going through Martina, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Excuse my voice, everyone. I'm doing my best. So this is just an information report. After every municipal election, staff are required to bring forward a report to council to report on what we did to improve accessibility during the election and to ensure that the election process was accessible to everyone in our community. So in this report, I've gone over everything that we did, including making sure that we had an accessibility plan in place, making sure all of our information was available in multiple formats and medias for anyone who required them. I discussed how our voting system complied with accessibility policies and legislation. I reviewed the voting location, staff training, assistance to candidates, assistance to voters, and some ideas for what we're going to do even better for the next election in 2026.
Thank you for that summary. Any questions of our clerk on this? Can we get a motion? Deputy Mayor Nelson, are you motioning or moving the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move, Madam Mayor, that we accept the recommendation.
Thank you. And that is seconded by, is there a seconder? Councillor Johnson.
Okay.
Thank you. All in favor? And that motion also carries. Look at us buzzing along. Moving on to committee minutes and other reports. Item 10.1, Deputy Mayor Nelson, do you have an update on county council matters?
Yes, we really haven't had any county council meetings since Christmas. I guess I just have one little item to bring up to let council know, and that is we're moving into our just over our blue box collection, and that is being put back to the producers of all of this recyclables. So there's a lot of changes that are going to come forward in the next 2 years. So we'll try and keep you up to date on what happens as them changes come forward. There's not a lot really yet to tell you, other than that the producers of that for the recycling have hired a huge company to look after their needs. And so there's a lot of questions out there about what's going to happen. And at this point, we really don't have the answers, but I can assure you that recycling will continue pretty much probably the way it has been, but it just depends on who's going to be doing it. And I do not believe that it will be the county that will be collecting our recycling in the future. Probably, again, there's so many unknowns, but they have to provide the same services that we have grown accustomed to. And that's set out by the provincial government. And so anyways, there is some changes in that area that will be coming that hopefully we can keep you abreast of the news and the information as we get fed that. Other than that, I really don't have anything else, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for that. Just one thing to add that kind of evolved over the last week or so. Warden Bonnie Clark has been acclaimed as the vice chair of the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. So definitely congratulations are in order to Warden Clark, and it's great to have that representation at that within that group. Could I get a motion, please, to receive Deputy Mayor Nelson's Councillor report, seconded by Councillor Watt. All in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you very much. We have minutes for the Douro-Dummer Marinas Facilities Future Ad Hoc Committee from October 12th, January 5th, and January 10th. Motion on those, please. Councillor Vervoort, seconded by Councillor Johnston. All in favor? That carries. And the Douro-Dummer Public Library Board minutes from November 10th of 2022. Councillor Watt, seconded. Nobody went. Councillor Johnston. All in favor. We're trying to move things along, people. Hands up. We have no correspondence and a number of bylaws, and I will hand it over to our clerk, Martina, to summarize those, please.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So there's quite a few bylaws on the agenda tonight. First bylaw is 2023-01. This is an annual borrowing bylaw that we put in place. This allows us to borrow from our bank under certain conditions to allow cash flow to take place when we have to make big payments to school board and the county and other partners. The next one is bylaw 2023-02. This is the interim tax levy and payment of interim taxes for the year. This is a bylaw that allows us to collect the February and April tax amounts before, based on last year's taxes. And then once the budget is passed, we'll be able to set a tax rate for the remainder of the year. The next one is the 2023-03 bylaw. This is to appoint a property standards committee. All of council sits on the property standards committee. And if there was a property standards claim, which took us to the committee level, then we would need to call you in to hear that issue. 2023-04 is a bylaw to amend the short-term rental advisory committee to include Mr. Martin on that committee. And then the final bylaw, 2023-05, is to amend our delegated powers and duties bylaw, which allows us, as you passed earlier, to have staff review the consent applications as they come in.
Thank you very much. And Madam Clerk, is one motion for the group of them suffice, or do we need to separate those out?
They can all be moved together unless council has a question about a specific one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watt?
I'll make a motion to pass all 5 of them unless someone has a question of one they want to pull out.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, your hand was up. You're seconding that. I can't hear you because you're on mute. Wave your arms around crazily if that's not what you're doing. So all in favor on that, please. And that motion carries. Moving along, we have no accounts, no reports from previous, no notices of motion. No, any announcements? Nothing. So now we're going to be moving into closed session. So this is the point of the meeting where we will be turning off the live streaming, turning off the recording. We're moving into closed for under section 239 of the Municipal Act for items that are subject to solicitor-client privilege. So could we get a motion for that, please? Deputy Mayor Nelson, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. We'll just wait a moment.